We have been talking about the Battle of David and Goliath, and I want to bring for you a little bit more midrash, our traditions that go beyond the main text of the Torah and the Tanakh itself. So I want to start off this afternoon or evening, and I had noticed, and separately Denise had noticed, today is on the calendar 6/13, June 13. So do with that as you like, but it's 6/13. Anyway, it said in the context of Goliath threatening the Jews, "Vayigash haplishti hashkem v'harev," morning and evening, he stood on that mountain and he threatened the Jews. Vayat Yatsev, he stood arba'im yom. And this went on for 40 days. And last class, we learned after 40 days, we saw David took him up on it, and they went to battle, and he brought his slingshot and his 5 stones, honoring Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, God, and Aharon. Some say Moshe and Aaron. And he destroyed Goliath, he cut off his head, we learned all of that. And then the Philistines fled, rather than keep their part of the deal, which had been, whichever side loses, whoever side champion loses to the other side, will submit themselves as slaves to the winning side. They did not honor their part of that deal. Okay. But I want to go back a moment before we go forward. Let's take a look, another moment's look, Arba'im Yom. This went on for 40 days that Goliath continued defying the armies of the living God and cursing and disrespectfully against God of Israel. And there's midrash on this, and I wanted to share it with you. First midrash I want to bring you is from what's called Ruth Rabbah. Several of the compilations of midrash are called such and such Rabbah, the name of the book on which the midrash talks, and it's called Rabbah, which means sort of like additional, extra. So there's the main text, and then there's the additional text, the extra. And that's Ruth Rabbah is extra on the book of Ruth. And we had learned in the book of Ruth, chapter 1, at the very, very beginning, when Naomi felt she had to leave Moab and go back to the land of Israel, Bethlehem, Judea, she bade goodbye to her 2 daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. She said to them, "I don't have any more children in me, and even if I would tonight suddenly have a husband and he would implant a child in me, it would take not only a year for the child to come, but then it would take how many, 20 years, 30 years, till the child would be ready to marry you, and by then you'd be what age? And so it's time to say goodbye." And we learned that Naomi lovingly said goodbye to both of them. They were Moabite women who had married her sons Machlon and Kilion. And we learned that while Ruth insisted on sticking with Naomi and going with her to the land of Israel, Orpah reasonably turned around and went back. Okay, so let's see how that wording was and what the Midrash says about it and what it has to do with Goliath. Vatomer Naomi shovna vnotai. Naomi said, "Return, my daughters. Lama telachna imi. Why should you continue with me? You're Moabite women. Ha'odli banim b'me'ai. Do I still have more children in my womb? V'hayu lachem lanashim that can become husbands to you. So shovna vnotai lichna kizakanti miyot leish." So go back home to your homeland, to your families. I'm too old to have another husband, and even if I would, gam hayiti halayla leish, even if I had a husband tonight, v'gam yaladati banim, and even if I became pregnant tonight, halahinta saberna ad asher yigdalu, halahinti agena, what, you're going to wait all those years till those boys would be ready? Levilti hayot leish, come on. Al benotai, don't do that. Kimar li ma'od mikam. I mean, this whole thing's, I feel sad for you. I feel sorry for you. You each lost a husband. Ki otzavi yad Hashem, because God is turned on me. His hand is turned on me. The two daughters-in-law really loved Naomi, and they cried. Vatisena kolan, vativkena od, they cried more. Vatishaka orpa lachamota v'rutav kaba. Orpah basically gave her a kiss goodbye, a loving kiss goodbye, whereas Ruth clung to her, did not give up. Vatomer hine shavayivim teich. And Naomi said, hey, look, Orpah, your sister-in-law, she's gone back, Elama, to her nation, the Eloheha, and to her gods of Moab. Shuvi achrei teich, go and follow the same way, to your gods and your way, and that's when Ruth famously said, no, I'm staying with you, where you go, I go, and all of that, where you go, I go, whither thou lodgest, I will lodge, your people shall be my people, your God, my God, where you die, will I die, there I'll be buried, etc. Okay, our focus here is on Orpah. In Ruth Rabbah, it says as follows. It talks about how the daughters-in-law cried, and they just had no strength. Toshash kochan. It actually picks up on the quirk of the Hebrew. We learn from every single letter in the Hebrew language that shows up. Very often there's a reason for everything, and they pick up on it. Anyway, they learn out that the daughters-in-law were dispirited. They really just dispirited, knocked out of them. Shehein mahalchot uvachot. Okay. Now, Rabbi Berechia b'shem Rabbi Yitzchak said, Rabbi Berechia said he learned from a Rabbi Yitzchak, a midrash, a tradition, a legend, arba'im pesiot ocha Orpah in chamota. Orpah, before she departed from her mother-in-law Naomi, first she walked 40 steps, 40 steps with Naomi towards the border with Israel. You'll remember the borders of Moab and Israel again. They're near each other. Let's see if we have them up here, just to refresh your memory. So here's Israel. Bethlehem would have been around here in Judea. And there's Moab. So Elimelech had left Bethlehem to move to Moab with his wife Naomi and their two sons, Machlon and Kilion. The boys married Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. And now with the boys gone and Elimelech dead, Naomi's going back, and Ruth goes with her, and Orpah takes 40 steps respectfully with her before turning back. So the Midrash tells us that Orpah took 40 steps together with the mother out of respect before turning back. V'nitla livna arba'im yom. And because she took 40 steps, Rabbi Berechia says he heard from Rabbi Yitzchak, because Orpah took 40 steps out of respect for Naomi, therefore she bought for her future descendant, Goliath, who's a descendant, we learned. We discern that that Orpah was his mother. It's not in the main text, it's our tradition of our Midrash. She bought for him unexpectedly, unknowingly, unintentionally, 40 extra days of life. He got 40 extra days of life because she took 40 steps with Naomi. Shinemar, as it says, we just read how the Philistine every morning and evening for 40 days. What's this deal with the 40 days? Because she took 40 steps. He was given that little bit of extra lifetime. So I wanted to share that, which is also brought up in the Midrash Tanchuma, a separate compilation of Midrash and legends, the same idea. That Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, here it doesn't cite Rabbi Berechia, but the original source, Rabbi Yitzchak, who said, Arba'im Pesiot Ocha Ima, that Orpah walked 40 steps with Naomi, Lefichach Natan HaKadosh Baruch Hu Schara. Therefore, God rewarded her, V'natan la Goliath, gave her a son, a big son, Goliath. He went on to be Macharef L'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He went on to curse and humiliate the Jewish armies and speak disrespectfully about the God of Israel? Arba'im Yom. And he was given 40 days longer rather than beaten the first station, Marvit Yatsev, Arba'im Yom. Okay. Now we're going to come to the next part of the story of the Midrash that I wanted to share with you. The bottom line of this Midrash, of the storyline, is that David came kind of to the rescue of King Saul. If you think about it, right? What happened? David came to the battlefield. He heard that whoever takes on this giant, the champion of the Philistines, if he wins, he'll be made very wealthy and get the king's daughter. He approached the king and said he's prepared to do it. The king accepted that in a way, but said, I don't think you're up to it. Lo tuchal lalechet el ha-plishti hazeh lilachem imo, ki na'ar atav hu ish milchama rav. You just won't be able to pull it off. He's a lifelong warrior from his youth. You're not up to it. And then David explained, you don't underestimate me. I may be a youthful shepherd, but I'm strong, I'm mighty. And there was a time I was unexpectedly attacked by a lion and a bear, and I killed them both with my bare hands. I can fight. I'm ready for this. And we learned the whole story. He is given the armor by King Saul. He finds it's too heavy. He takes it off. He goes with his slingshot, his 5 stones, and he kills the Philistine. And this we learn. And by doing so, he actually not only saved the Jewish people as a general aspect, but in particular, he salvaged the kingship of King Saul. Had it not been for what he did, the armies of Israel would have fallen and would have become slaves to the Philistines. And where would that have left King Saul? King Saul would have been left a slave as well, rather than king of Israel. Now, if you recall, King Saul comes from the tribe of Benjamin. I don't know if we remember that. We may have to go back and kind of revisit that, and that forces me to go back and revisit where we first read about that. But we learned that when Saul was designated, he had been looking, if you remember, he had been looking for his father's lost donkeys or asses, however you want to call it, the chamorim, and he'd been looking for them. And that's how he first encountered Samuel, Shmuel the Navi. And you may remember that Samuel, in designating him, making him the king, it was this young man, Saul, the son of Kish, okay? The son of Kish from the tribe of Benjamin. And we learned about that. You may remember that this was this man from the smallest of tribes. Benjamin was the smallest of tribes. And his was from the smallest of families within the tribes. And it was here, I'm sorry if it took me a moment to pick it up, but it was the beginning of chapter 9, that it was an Ish mi ben Yamin, a man from the tribe of Benjamin, Ushimo Kish ben Aviel ben Sor ben Bechoret ben Afiach ben Ishimini, and he had a son named Saul. So Saul was a Benjaminite, very important for our Midrash here. Saul was a Benjaminite, and David was from the tribe of Judah. I mean, that we know, we've learned that many times over, that Yehuda, the tribe of Judah, would be the forerunner of the kings of Israel, and ultimately the Mashiach, Messiah, from David. Okay. So the Midrash gets very interested in this. And the Midrash goes all the way back to the beginnings of the Jewish people and the Chumash, to an interesting verse. Let's take a look at it. Genesis chapter 43, Bereshit Perek Men Gimel. This was when, let's get that, Genesis 43. Right. This was back when Joseph had been sold into slavery in Egypt, had risen from the house of Potiphar and from prison to interpret dreams. He had become so beloved of the Pharaoh that the Pharaoh made him number 2 overall of Egypt. And now Joseph is running Egypt. The brothers had come to Egypt during the period of famine, begging for food. Joseph recognized them. They did not recognize him. And in order to try to get his father, eventually concocted a plan by which he held, first he held Simon hostage and sent the brothers back. Then he decided to get them to bring Benjamin, the youngest of all. Yaakov did not want to let Benjamin loose. Benjamin, as Yosef, they were the 2 sons of Rachel who had died. That was all that remained alive in Yaakov's life from his beloved Rachel. And with Yosef, Yaakov thought Yosef was dead. So all he had was Benjamin, if you remember. Yehuda, Judah, the most important of the brothers, said to his father at the time, Dad, the viceroy in Egypt said he won't let us come back to ask for more food unless we come with our youngest brother, Benjamin. And the father said, I'm not going to let him go. Indeed, Lama harayotem li lagid li isha od lechem ach. Why did you even tell him you had a younger brother who wasn't there with you? Now look what you've done. If you bring him, I mean, what if he doesn't come back? And if he doesn't come back, I have no life. I can't give him up. And Yehuda says, Vayomer Yudah Yisrael Aviyu. Yehuda says to his father, Yaakov, who's also named Yisrael, Shilcha hana'ariti, Dad, please send the young lad with me. I'll take responsibility. V'nakuma v'nalecha will go to Egypt, will get food, nechya lo namut, will live, not die. Anochi ervenu miadi tavakshenu. I give you my personal guarantee. I won't let him be left behind. Imlo haviotiv elecha v'hetzaktiv lefanecha v'chatati lecha kol hayamim. I'm telling you, if I don't bring him back, you can hold this against me for all eternity. I take a personal responsibility. I will protect Benjamin. Okay. And then comes the next chapter where, if you remember, the brothers all come with Benjamin. And sure enough, Joseph takes Benjamin prisoner. There's the whole story about how everybody gets sent back with satchels, and a goblet is found in the satchel of Benjamin. We won't taking out a lot of time on this. I don't want to take out more time on it. Bottom line is that Benjamin gets brought back and imprisoned. And Yehuda had made a promise. He's not leaving without Benjamin. And so he makes an appeal. Yehuda makes an appeal. Va'igash elav Yehuda vayomer bi Adoni yedaber navdecha dava ba'eznei Adoni. Please, Yehuda says to the viceroy, let me speak. I have to tell you. You had asked whether we have another son, a brother. I told you we had a younger brother. You said we should bring him. I told you if we bring him, anything happens, it'll kill our father. The Horadatem et Sevati Asha Ola, our dad said it'll kill him if he doesn't come back. V'nafsho k'shura b'nafsho, our dad's soul is bound inextricably with the soul of this young boy. We can't do it. We can't leave him behind. V'haya. If we come back to our father without him, Kirotoki and a narva mate, if he sees we don't have the young Benjamin with us, he will die. You got to let him come. I am prepared to sit here as your prisoner in lieu of the young boy. Let me be Eved Ladoni. Let me be a slave to you. And the boy, Hanar Ya'al im Echad. Let the boy go back home with his brothers. Ki eich e'ele el avi v'anar enenu iti. How can I possibly show my face to my father without this young man with me? I'll see my father die. Pen erev hara asher yamsat avi. Don't make me even have to see the evil that will befall my father. Okay. The Midrash picks up on this. The story that seems to have nothing to do with David and Goliath. Let's take a look at the Midrash. Omar Yishai liv David beno. Jesse, Yishai, amid the daily outrages going on with Goliath defying and mocking and humiliating the Jewish armies and God, Yishai had said to his son David, Hare hasha'al kayem oto ha'arevut shel zekenecha she'arav et Binyamin miyad aviv. It now is time in this generation to complete the guarantee, the guarantorship, there's no such word, but your ancestor, the original Judah, Yehuda, for whom our tribe is named, our progenitor had sworn he would stand and protect Benjamin. And now it's our time to finish the promise. We of Judah, of Yehuda, have to complete the protection of Benjamin. In this case, protecting the monarchy of King Saul of the tribe of Benjamin. Shne'emar anochi ervenu. After all, that's what Yehuda had said to his father Yaakov, Yisrael. I will be his guarantor. Elalech v'hotzei oto me arvuto. It is on you now, me arevuto. It is on you now, David, to complete the deal. And so, halach v'kiyem et ha'arevut. David went forth to fulfill the completion of the guarantee that the tribe of Judah will stand and will defend the tribe of Benjamin. V'harag Goliath, and he killed Goliath. Aleph Lamm and Amarle HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chayecha, Keshem shenatat et nafshecha al Shaul, shehu mishvato shel Binyamin. God said to David, just as you have risked your life for the safety and sake of Saul of the tribe of Benjamin, you've done Kashem Asa Yehuda Zekenecha al Binyamin. You did exactly as your progenitor Yehuda did for the original Benjamin. Shne'emar v'ata yeshev na'avdecha tachat anar eved laduni. As it says, we just read it, how Judah had said to Joseph, I'll sit in the stead of Benjamin. And therefore God says, according to the Midrash, I'm going to set up the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, geographically so that it abuts both Benjamin and Judah among the tribes. Kach ani noten Beit HaMikdash bigvulecha. Therefore, I will put the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, in your boundaries of the tribe of Judah, ubigvul Binyamin, and the tribal boundaries of Benjamin, like on the border. Like we live in California. So California, there's like a border with Arizona. Or if you live in New York, there's a border with New Jersey, somewhere right in the middle of the Lincoln Tunnel, the Holland Tunnel, and the George Washington Bridge. Where there's actually like a sign that'll say, I remember when I was in Kentucky for a year, borders Indiana, also Ohio, and you've seen wherever you've traveled, let's say in America, you are now entering the state of whatever. Right now, the state of disarray and the state of disrepair. But it'll say like you're now, so there's a borderline between the two states, or in this case, the two tribal territories. And the Beit HaMikdash will be placed on the boundaries. And actually, if we take a look at the map, we will see that the Beit HaMikdash, true to this Midrash, was placed. Here's, if you could see on this map, it says Jerusalem here in the green, in the tribal territory of Judah, Yehuda. But if you look at the arrow, it's just about on the border of the orange, the tribe of Benjamin. And that's where the Beit HaMikdash is, just in the tribe of Benjamin, in Judea, Binyamin. So I wanted to share that with you as we go forward now in the main text, because it is so important to always remember that when we learn Bible, Tanakh, we so often need to go beyond the main text. There's more going on than simply the actual text. There's Midrash that enriches the storyline. And so that's where we left off last week with the text of chapter 17. Okay. So now we go into chapter 18. We started. We found, first of all, that as David became closer and closer with King Saul, and part of King Saul's regular palace, playing the harp for him whenever he went into moods of depression, and now having been a tremendous warrior in King Saul's army, having taken down the evil Goliath, he struck up a friendship with Jonathan, Yonatan, the son of King Saul, his main son. He had other sons too. And you can understand, like, nowadays, you get out, you go to play. Well, nowadays, no one goes out to play. They're all on social media. They're on their phones and they're texting all day and looking at 10-second idiotic TikToks by influencers. But in the old days, kids went out and played. But Yonatan, he was protected. He was within the king's palace, and he didn't really have like a peer, like a guy like him, like the same age and the same, like a dynamic, charismatic personality. And, everybody there was probably a sycophant who would just, kind of suck up to the king's son, and people assumed the future king. He didn't have like a real friend. And along comes David, becomes regular in the palace, and they became friends. And it's actually, interestingly, the same language as Yehuda used when he described how Yaakov loved Binyamin. We had learned the term was nafsho kasharab nafsho. His soul was bound with his soul. That was Benjamin. And David, his soul was bound with him. They became that tight. And this drove Saul crazy, because Saul, little by little by little, amid his depression, and amid having been told by the prophet Samuel, that he's going to lose the dynasty, he continually, almost paranoidally, kept wondering, if I'm going to lose the dynasty, who's the one that's going to take it from me? I mean, it's like you look in politics. Politics is a disgusting thing. It is what we have. And we could have an interesting debate after the last few years whether democracy is better than a monarchy. I used to think, what's the question? It's a good question. But certainly, as long as we have democracy, which in many ways is the best form of government if it's not divinely ruled, you see what happens in democracy. People who are very good friends become enemies as soon as they are perceived as political opponents. Right now, among the Republicans, a year ago, Trump loved DeSantis. Trump loved DeSantis so much, he moved from New York to Florida. Now to listen to Trump, DeSantis is the worst thing that ever happened. That's politics. It's not only Trump. I'm giving him as an example. The other side was Obama and Hillary Clinton. We forget now, it's 10 years ago. But Hillary Clinton and Obama were close, and then they really got quite nasty. It got very nasty. And then Obama did what a lot of politicians do when they get elected. You take your main political opponent and you make that person the foreign minister or the secretary of state to get the person out of the country. That's what Netanyahu did with Gil Erdan, one of his main opponents in the Likud. So he made him the ambassador to the United Nations, keep him in New York for the next 4 years, and keep him out of Israel so he doesn't compete against him. That's politics. King Saul became increasingly wary of David, knowing from Shmuel Hanavi, from the prophet Samuel, he's going to lose the reign. He's going to lose the dynasty. Who will it be? Increasingly, he began wondering, is it going to be David? And if it is David who's going to threaten my son Jonathan, it drove him crazy that Jonathan didn't get the memo and instead was David's biggest supporter. It drove him crazy. And we're going to start seeing that for the next few chapters. That Saul could not abide that of all the people in the world, the one who most loved David was Jonathan. He's going to take your throne from you. What's wrong with you? So, Vayechrot Yonatan v'David Brit, Yonatan, Jonathan, and David made a sort of covenant. But Havato Oto Kanafsho, we will always be best friends. We'll always be besties, BFFs, no matter what comes between us. Nothing will. Vayet Pashet Yonatan et Me'ila Asher Alav Yetnei David, Umadav Yat Charbo Yat Kashto Yat Chagoro. And basically, Jonathan gave David his royal armor. You could always get another set. But symbolically, he gave him his royal armor, his royal sword. He gave him everything. We're brothers. We're blood brothers. David b'chol asher yishlachenu Shaul. Yes, Q? And David, meanwhile, proceeds to be a loyal servant to Saul, Shaul, do anything and everything he's asked to do, and whatever he touches, Midas touch, he succeeds. So Saul started becoming so wary of David, W-A-R-Y, wary, concerned, that he decided to set David up to get killed. He wouldn't kill him himself. He'd be killing a national hero who killed Goliath. So Vayasimehu Shaul al Anshe HaMilchama. He made David a general in his army who would have to be in the front lines of battle to increase the probabilities that David would get killed in battle. And that'll solve the problem without me touching him. But Itav bi'enei kol ha'am, the whole nation loved the idea of David becoming the main guy in battle. You know, it's like when Ariel Sharon succeeded in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, leading his unit, his battalion across, his brigade, whatever, across the Suez Canal into Egypt. Everyone thought Egypt was marching on Jerusalem, and then they woke up and found out that Ariel Sharon had marched his unit was moving to Cairo, and it turned around the entire Yom Kippur War. He became a national hero, ultimately the prime minister of Israel. We've been learning on Sundays about the rise of the Jewish underground. All the leaders, all the generals of the Jewish underground became national heroes who eventually became prime ministers of Israel. Yitzhak Rabin was a leader in the Haganah. He became a prime minister of Israel. Menachem Begin was commander of the Irgun. He became prime minister of Israel. Yitzhak Shamir, prime minister of Israel, had been the commander of the Lehi. So in the same way, while Saul's intention was to get David killed, he actually was reinforcing David's national heroic stature, taking the man who had killed simply Goliath and now making him a general of his army. And David kept leading the army in battle and winning. V'gamba einei avdei Shaul, even the servants loyal to Saul regarded David as a national hero. Drove him crazy more. And this was the final straw for Saul. Vayehi b'vo am b'shuv David me'akot et ha'plishtim. And it was the big celebration. You know how in the United States, they have a ticker tape parade, goes down Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, or when a baseball team or a football team wins the World Series or Super Bowl, they have a parade down the main street, and there's a ticker tape parade. So there was like a ticker tape parade, so to speak, after David killed Goliath. and the Israelite armies destroyed the Philistines. And you know what happens in ticker tape parades? I actually got to be at one in my year when I was in Louisville, Kentucky. It wasn't like a celebratory ticker tape parade, but to have an annual parade the week before the Kentucky Derby. It's known as the Pegasus Parade. They have a big, gigantic Pegasus, like dressed up like half human, half horse, and or a horse with wings or whatever. And they have a big, gigantic parade, and everybody who is fortunate enough to, let's say, work in an office on the main boulevard in Louisville that the parade goes through, everybody goes on the balconies of their office buildings and looks over and watches the parade. And you've seen this in movies, Roman gladiator movies, where they have the great parades and people leaning over the balconies and cheering and waving, or think of Mardi Gras in Louisville, in New Orleans, where everybody is hanging over on the Mardi Gras. So in the same way, you have all the women hanging over their balcony railings as David and Saul lead the parade, the two victorious, the king of Israel and the kid who killed Goliath. And here's what they're chanting. And as the parade goes on with David returning with Saul after killing the Philistine, and the women come out to sing and dance on the appearance and arrival of the victorious King Saul, betupim b'simcha uv'shalishim, with drums and timbrels and cymbals and all of that. And the women started singing and chanting the following tune, not a melody, but a chant. Hika Shaul ba'alafav v'David b'rivavotav. The great and mighty King Saul has killed his thousands. That's pretty good. That's quite a cheer. And David has killed his tens of thousands. And that drove Saul crazy. At first, the way it began was they were cheering Saul. And as the king, he expected that. And then it turned out his harp player and underling was getting praised for killing 10 times as many. But Yichar Shaul Ma'od, Saul was very angry. But he was just beyond words furious. He said, they're praising David for killing tens of thousands and me only thousands? This goes on a little more. He's going to be given the kingdom from me. I had an experience I'll share with you briefly where I had something like this. In my legal career of about 10 or 11 or 12 years in major law firms, the three main firms I worked at were Jones Day, Heller, Irvine, and Akin Gump. And then actually when I wound it down and went back to being a Rav again, after having been a Rav for 10 years, I returned to the field to initially supplement my income, because when I returned to being a rabbi, it initially was a very small congregation that could not pay me much. So I had to supplement my income with a part-time law job, and I worked at a place called Baker and Hostetler, another of the major firms. But here's what happened to me at Akin Gump, very interesting. At Akin Gump, so I applied for the job. So you go for interviews. And the way it works in a major law firm is first you circulate your resume, and normally through a headhunter, a recruiter, and then they, if they like you, they call you in for an interview with about 6 lawyers, 6 partners, at a big firm, I mean, a real big firm. And if you get past that, they call you, they have what's called the callback. And when you come back the second time, there's like 10 more interviews, like a whole day of like 10 one-hour interviews, plus lunch, which on the one hand, they're treating you to lunch. And on the other hand, they're looking to see how you eat. Do you have good etiquette when you eat? So you have to know, for example, you never order spaghetti, anything with tomato sauce. You never have soup, and you never have salad during such an interview lunch. You get salad, you get a piece of lettuce between your teeth, you're finished. Soup, you spill it on your tie. Tomato sauce, forget about it. Likewise, spaghetti. So you have to know to be real careful. Okay, I'm kosher. I ended up having a melon plate. That's another thing. In those days, they looked at me like LGBTQ. Like, what kind of man orders a melon plate? You're at a 5-star Los Angeles top-of-the-notch restaurant. Each of us is ordering like the most expensive filet mignon steak on the menu because the firm is paying for it. We're expecting you to order like at least a $100 steak or something. And I tell them, I'll just have a fruit plate. And again, this is 1990 before Pride Month, okay? And I'm not getting into Pride Month now. We'll leave that for a Shabbat sermon. But that's how they looked at me. What kind of man has fruit? Anyway, so I went through that whole thing, and there was a particular guy who became my strongest advocate. They all liked me because if they don't all like you, you don't get the job. That's the reason they put you through that kind of 10 lawyers. Even one says no, you don't get it because there's plenty of people applying for that one job. So I got the job, and I had one particular partner who was my single biggest advocate. He almost made it like, I want this guy. He will be on my team. I insist on it. And since everyone else liked me, I got the job. So I worked with him. I was on his team, and he loved me. He really, for the first year or two, a year, he loved me. And then something happened, just like what we just learned now in Perek Chet of Shmuel Aleph. I was assigned to handle a case that involved millionaires in Guatemala who owned a frozen broccoli corporation. They amassed millions of pounds of broccoli, and they would freeze it and send it to California where it would be distributed. And if you find broccoli in the frozen food section of your department, of your grocery store, supermarket, it might very well have been their broccoli under a name like Birdseye or something. Anyway, it was a very complicated litigation, and I won't go into the details, but it really was a major litigation. It was so big. And this guy put me in charge of the litigation. He actually took a back seat, and he said, Dov, it's all yours. Do anything you like, unlimited budget. Let me know what you're doing, but you run it your way. I want to see what you do when we give you a case all for yourself. And it was a tremendous success. But anyway, one of the things I did in the case was I hired a public relations professional, and he got an article about the litigation from our perspective published in the Wall Street Journal. I cannot begin to tell you how powerful that was. That was just an amazing thing and had a tremendous impact. I won't take up your time on it, but take it from me, it was a major thing. So the Wall Street Journal writes an article about this case and puts our side of the story out, and they quote me. And I showed it to my boss the next day. I said, this is just to let you see what's going on. And something amazing happened. He looked at me and he said, why are they quoting you? Why aren't they quoting me? I said, I don't know. I mean, they wanted to know about the case. I'm handling the case. If I were to say to you, talk to them, you're not really involved in the case. I keep up to date, but I'm handling the case. I mean, he had no idea, like, to me, what mattered in my life was to be a rabbi. To me, the big honor is to be written about in the Jerusalem Post or to be written about in a Torah journal. I could care less about being written about in the Wall Street Journal about a Guatemala broccoli case. But to him, that's what his life was about. I didn't think of it. And from that day, he turned on me. He never let me work on another case with him. And he started giving me bad reviews. There's an annual thing every year at the firm, at all the big firms, not just that one, where anyone that worked with a given underling during the year is asked to write up a little bit of a report. How did they do the past year? And then they put it all together and they decide how much of a bonus you get, et cetera, et cetera. He turned on me. He suddenly turned on me. all because I got quoted in the Wall Street Journal and he didn't. And I later came to see, I did some Googling. He had never been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, and that would have been his moment. That was his chance. He was never in the Wall Street Journal. He was never in the New York Times. He gets quoted all the time in legal journals, and that was his chance. And it didn't occur to me. And he turned on me. That's to understand that the Bible is real. These stories are real stories of real people. And all King Saul had to hear is that David is getting cheered by the women, and David had nothing to do with it. It's not like David was lobbying and had a public relations person who was promoting him to the public. He had no PR. He just showed up with his little slingshot and his stones. I guess he had 4 left. And this destroyed him with Saul. So that was it. Saul decided he's got to go. Vayehi Shaul, oyenet David me'ayom huvahala. That word ayin, which means an eye. Saul kept an eye on David the rest of life. Vayehi mimacharat vatitzlach ruach Elokim ra'ah Shaul. The very next day, Saul went into another depression and another funk. David, well, when Saul, he doesn't know what's going on with Saul's head. He's told Saul's going through a depression, so David comes out with the harp and starts playing the harp to calm and soothe the king. Like he always does, kiyom b'yom, like every time. And Saul had a spear in his hand, the chanit. And his David is sitting there with his harp. And you know, a harp is not like a flute, like you can just, or a violin or a guitar where you can walk back and forth on the stage like they do at concerts. With a harp, you sit in a chair. You're stationary while you play a harp. Saul comes with a spear towards David and decides, I'm going to kill him. And he twice thrusts his spear at David, and David twice gets out of the way. But David, Saul was a little surprised that David was so quick and so flexible. He thought he was going to quickly kill him, quote unquote, by accident. Because Saul began to see David, he's wise, he's streetwise, he's flexible, he gets out of the way. God's with him, and at the same time, God was departing from Saul. And so now Saul made David not only a general in the army, but a general who definitely would have to be in the front lines. And so definitely to get him killed. But it continued, whatever Saul did and assigned David, David succeeded. All he was doing was rising in the national stature. And so Saul didn't know what to do. The whole nation loved David as a national hero. Think of Dwight Eisenhower after World War II, or for many people, General Douglas MacArthur or Patton. They had their enemies, they had their detractors, but certainly Eisenhower or George Washington, think of a general who just was beloved by everybody. So again, the way in Israel, they looked on some of those leaders of the underground who rose to be prime minister. And so Saul said to David, he said, you know, I did promise you one of my daughters. Saul's plan was the following. I have 2 daughters, Meirav and Michal. Michal, by the way, if you're not acquainted with it, Michael is Michael, but Michal is a female name. I have 2 daughters. I did, after all, publicly promise that whoever kills Goliath gets a daughter. But this is not so bad for me, because my daughters are loyal to me. And I'm going to marry him off to one of my daughters and have her sabotage him. That's the new plan. Going to make him crazy. Going to give him a wife. He's going to rue the day he ever got her for a wife. Vayomer Shmuel al David, Hine biti agdola Merav, ota ten lecha l'isha. My older daughter Merav, you can have her. By the way, the present leader of the Israeli Labor Party, her name is Merav Michaeli. So Merav is a modern day Israeli name too for women. Ach heyeli leven chayil bilachem milchamot Hashem. So Saul says he's got a two-front strategy. I'm going to give you Merav as a wife, and I also want you to continue fighting in the battlefront. V'sha'ol amar al tehi yadibo utivo yad plishtim. Saul's thinking was, let not my hand be on him, let the Philistines kill him. Vayomer David el Shaul mi anochi u'michayai. David took this innocently, naively, and he's saying, I don't deserve such honor. Who am I to deserve to be married to the daughter of the king of Israel? Who am I to be like a general in the armies of Israel? Well, parenthetically, V'hinitna la'Adriel hamecholati lisha. She actually had been promised to another guy beforehand. Some say she actually was already married to Adriel. Some say they understand she had been promised to Adriel. Well, so there's a problem here with the strategy. I want Merav to destroy him from the inside, but I already promised her to someone else or gave her to someone else. But it worked out that Michal, the younger of the two daughters, actually loved David. Daddy, can I marry him? But te'ahav Michal bat Shaul et David. Michal, the younger daughter, loved him. Vayagidu l'Shaul, and the people around the palace told the king, your younger daughter, she would like to marry him. And Saul felt, okay, so I'll have her be my person. But Yishar Dava Be'inav, it was fine with him. Vayomer Shaul etnan lo. So Saul said, I'll give her to David. Utehi lo limokesh, and may she be against him as a stumbling block and an obstacle. That she may be a snare to him. Utehi bo yad plishtim. I'll have domestically at home, she'll make him crazy and do my bidding to destroy him. And he'll go to battle. He'll have all his aggravation from home in his head while he's fighting the Philistines. He'll have a break in concentration when they come at him. And that'll be the end of him. Vayomer Shaul el David, Bishtayim titchaten bihayom. So you know what? Marry the other one. Marry her. Marry the second daughter. Vayitzav Shaul et avadav dabru el David belat limor hinei chafetz b'cha hamelech v'chol avadav ahevucha v'ata tchaten b'melech. So he sent some of his people to start putting the word into David's head. The king really likes you very much, and he'd really like you to marry one of his daughters, and you really should take him up on it. Stop being so modest. Take him up on it. And Vaydabru avdei Shaul bi asnei David, and the servants of Saul kept working on David, telling him you should take him up on it. And David kept saying, but I'm not worthy. And then they kept coming back to Saul saying, he's saying not worthy. And Saul says as follows, all right, he wants to earn it. He feels I'm a poor kid, I'm a shepherd, I'm a nobody. Who am I to be the son-in-law of the king? All right, he wants to earn it. Tell him the following. Listen, Ein chafetz lamelech ben mohar. Tell him the king is not looking for a dowry for his daughter. That's how they did it in the old days. So he's saying, I'm not looking for dowries. I want 100 Philistine foreskins. That doesn't mean 400 skins. That's 100 foreskins. I want 100 foreskins of the Philistines. Lihina came hamelech. I want vengeance against those who are the enemies of the king. And in this way, Saul was sure this would lead David to his demise. This David agreed to. Okay, I'll earn the right to marry into the king's household. I'll do it. And he did it right away. David and his men went to war, and they killed 200 Philistines. And he brought 200 foreskins, which is not 800 skins. And sure enough, the king gave David Michal. Saul saw David is blessed, God is with him. And by the way, Michal bat Shaul ahavto. Michal loved him also. By Yosef Shaul romiknei David od, and all that came out of all of this is that Saul feared David even more than before, because he's stronger than before. He just wiped out yet another Philistine unit or brigade or battalion. Now he's got my daughter, and she's, instead of being my representative to make him crazy, she's madly in love with him. And Saul, it was just a personal, bitter animus all his life. In finishing this chapter 18, as our time is running out, I want to just address a moment to deal with the foreskins, because that doesn't normally come up in every battle. It's not like that's what Putin and Zelensky are doing with each other now, collecting Russian and Ukrainian foreskins, or anyone else. So I want to explain what that's about. Nowadays, we have photography. We have video. If I come and tell you today, I just killed 200 Philistines, I'll bring pictures, I'll bring video proof. Maybe I'll bring, I don't know, witnesses. I don't know, fingerprints. Go back a couple of thousand years. If David comes to King Saul and says, I just slaughtered 200 Philistines in battle. By the way, these are not nice people that he killed. These were kill or be killed. It's not like, in order to get married, just randomly go and kill 200 people in the New York City subway. Okay? That they do without having to get married. What we're talking here is that these are 200 Philistine soldiers who are lined up to kill the Israelite army anyway in battle. It's just a matter, it's not if, it's when. So it's just a matter of moving the battle a little ahead. But back to the foreskins. How do you prove to Saul you killed 200 Philistines? You don't have pictures. You don't have video. You don't have proof. What's your proof? You're going to bring a finger? Because that's what they did in the old days in some cases. They bring fingers. That's why he cut off the head of Goliath. That's the way to prove he killed Goliath, and to remind everybody he did it. Because people will say, how do we know you killed him? Nowadays, you have proof. You Google it. When the United States killed some of these guys lately, in the last few years, there was like a picture at the Iraqi airport of the guy. All that was left of him was a finger with a ring on it. Abdul Bakhtar, or whatever his name was, or whatever, Hassan. Okay, whatever his name was. So, but how do you prove it in those days? So they're dead anyway, and the king is saying, "Bring me proof you killed 200 or 100 Philistine men." What would a Philistine man have that a Jewish man wouldn't have that would prove you killed a Philistine man? Every Jewish man in the nation had been circumcised at 8 days old. unless they had shorted bilirubin and have to delay it until their body is able. But every Jewish male is circumcised. So the foreskins actually are proof that there are a lot of dead non-Jews. There's no way to prove the difference of a foreskin of a Philistine from Moabite from an Ammonite, but it's understood in the context of this. He went to war with the Philistines. Not going to start a war with Ammonites. The Philistines are there to be beaten. So, but that's to explain what's going on. You're both getting proof. You're sending him to the front lines. You're hoping he gets killed. And if he does come back, it's a little bit also like in The Wizard of Oz, where the fake wizard tells Dorothy and the Tin Woodsman and the Scarecrow and the lion, the cowardly lion, come back with the Wicked Witch's broom. What's he going to do with the broom? Sweep up Oz? The idea is to put them in a position of peril. In order to get near that broom, she'll kill them first. So it was to get them killed. In the same way, that was Saul's intention. And that's why he picked that. And that's why it was foreskins. And so we end this chapter with David married now to Michal. She loves him. And what is Saul going to do next? And then we'll find out next week, God willing. Thanks so much for being here. And we'll continue with this, God willing, next Tuesday. And Thursday night in RIETS Hashem, we'll continue with the Mishnah of Baba Metzia. And on Sunday, we'll continue our series on the rise of Israel with a discussion partly about the Haganah and the rise of the state of Israel. Laila Tov, thanks for being here.